The goal of college is to make you a gay communist, and they're very successful at that.
Since 1980, the average cost of tuition has increased 1,184%. And the value of that education, in my mind, has gone down.
We've been sold a product that has since become rotten. Start a business and provide some value.
You'll get a better education in 1 year of owning a small landscaping business than you will freshman year of college. Hans, what's happening? It's Friday afternoon where I'm at, September 19th right now. Welcome back. We're going to record another episode here for the Remnant Finance podcast.
Yeah, looking forward to it. This is a fun topic. We are pretty far apart in the age of our children overall. Mine are 4 and 1, so I got a much longer time frame to think about this. What's that?
I've got a 6-year-old. We're not too far apart.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, you're my first versus your last is close, but as far as you having to deal with the topic we're going to be talking about today and making some big decisions along with your children, you're only a couple years away. What, 4 years away from your oldest?
Yeah, my oldest is in 9th grade, but your oldest daughter better watch out, man. Hudson's a pretty good looking dude. They're only 2 years apart. You know they're pure blood. You know they're going to have a good system.
Well,
grandkids will just be short. That's your downfall.
Yeah, I can't even. I'm at the point where like seeing my daughter with putting her backpack on just is already like too much to see. Like it's just so crazy that she's becoming a little person, at 4. So I am miles away from thinking about her being even in the double digits. Like her being 9 and 10 just blows my mind. So I can't imagine what 14 is like. And I get to have this. What we're gonna be talking about is college, the value or lack thereof of the system, our thoughts on that, what it's quickly becoming, and how the entire premise is collapsing. And then if you are going to incorporate this into your financial planning, despite what the system has become, and I don't, for a lot of listeners, I think this is a pointless conversation because I don't think the idea we have of you go to college to better your prospects of increasing your income, et cetera. I mean, that is already that's already like moving in the wrong direction statistically.
And before we even like really dive into this, one of the things about that was always like, hey, if people with a college degree, and this is an older statistic, I didn't actually spend the time because this has popped up looking at what they currently say, but it was always like that the people that earn a bachelor's degree on average earn $1 million more in their lifetime. But they never factored in the point that somebody who went to college and completed that degree probably is a bit more of a self-starter, probably is a bit more industrious, and probably would have done that anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that make that statistic irrelevant, and I think that is now an outdated statistic. That was the final, like, the last grasp that your school counselor would say and trying to get you to go this route. But that doesn't even hold water anymore. We'll cover those statistics in a lot more detail. But if you decide, if you still want to incorporate as a young parent or a parent with a child that's coming up on college age, if that's still in your plan, we're going to talk about how the way that we approach finances can optimize preparation for that, paying for it, et cetera. But yeah, that point you made about that, on average, you make more with a bachelor's degree than without. Well, one, that is not true if you isolate things demographically. For instance, right now, your chances of earning, like for instance, take a white male that's in high school, if you go to college, on average, your income is less than if you don't. Now you could and that's the only one I know because that's the one that's like the first one to cross that line where we've regressed back to the point where there's a net negative value in the one metric that they clung to, which was higher average income for undergrad degrees. That is no longer the case for one demographic, which is white males. And I would imagine in the future, that's going to become like they're each going to start regressing back past that point where now white males are in the negative by going to college on average. But we have a combination of factors here. We have the immense value in the trades now, which have been shunned for so long in favor of this college system, that it's diluted the value of the college degree at the expense of trades, which now you can command your own price. You could be 25 owning your own business and you're Babe Ruth calling your shot with how much you want to charge because there's a shortage of workers. The average age for that field is so old, or is old and retiring without a big body of workforce to replace it. And so that's a major factor there. AI is honestly the final the nail in the coffin. And that's kind of what I plan to cover in detail with this. But yeah, it's not even the case. And you could take the bell curve, the distribution, you chop off, doctors and lawyers, and chop off the other end of the spectrum. And if you're just looking at like the average in the middle, maybe say 2 standard deviations on the bell curve there, I don't think you can make the case without those extreme data points of just to like wrap that thought up. If someone makes $0, they're on the far end of the bell curve, right? The same way that someone who makes $1 million is on the other far extreme of the bell curve, right? But that person who makes 0 is only say $60,000 or $80,000 away from the average in the middle of the bell curve, while the person making $1 million is over 10x away. And so that
Yeah.
skews the
They're like
average,
100 deviations off. Yeah.
right? And so that statistic alone, it relies so heavily on those far end distributions and how far you can go beyond the average versus you can only go to 0 from the middle is inherently going to skew that as well. So it's a pointless statistic, and it should never ever be used in this decision.
I mean, yeah, and that's very similar to, because we've beat it to death on past episodes of like the average 401k balance or IRA balance, and it's skewed by the people who have multi-millions, when the average, and then they say the average is $300,000 at this point, but really the median would be a better accurate predictor of where the general public falls. And same exact thing with these salaries. So the statistics are never as straightforward as they seem. But I don't know. So before we start, I was thinking about this when you were saying she's 4. Did you start teaching her anything in that book to read? The 100
The,
Easy Lessons.
yeah, we started that. She's
Awesome.
mind blowing. I mean, it's so interesting because she's at an age now where her peers are starting quote school, which is not school.
Preschool.
It's daycare, right? It's
Yeah.
TK here is what they call it, but it's really just getting some social time, and they try, it it's babysitting, but you're now being brought down to the mean of the class because there's really no necessary curriculum. So when you impose one on kids that are 4, it doesn't provide any value. But the amount of books that my daughter wants to read, the amount of learning she wants to do, she's obsessed with it. And it's really cool seeing how much she's progressing to where we can have full-blown conversations with her at 4 and she understands things. And she's so impressive. And the biggest, I would attribute that to no vaccines, generally no seed oil, healthy diet, trying to be as conscious as we can about that. But then primarily above and beyond that, I think is just the fact that my wife's been very diligent about being intentional and speaking to her like an adult, trying to sit her down and talk through issues. It's like she has a level of patience with her that is yielding results because the way that she can handle situations. I mean, she's just so impressive. But we are doing that reading book, and it's been good too. She can write her name, and she can,
Yeah, that's
it's
awesome.
cool.
That's awesome. And before we hit the college thing, it's funny. Like, my kids kind of unfortunately are in the part of the public school system, and so I emailed the teacher, and because they're sending home like sight words, and Hudson can fully read like what would be considered probably second grade level books, and the first, before he started kindergarten, and she sent back an assessment saying that he's an emergent reader because they use this computer based like absolute, which tells me that she hasn't actually said, can you read this, and sat down as a person to person. They used some computer based assessment, and he missed a few sounds of letters, which he actually knows. So I don't know, maybe it was a computer based assessment. So who knows where his mind was. And the thing says that he's probably starting to recognize some words and be able to put together words, like he'll go, at for Matt. And I'm like, no, I can like open up a magazine and he'll get everything except the multiple syllable words that he has to
Yeah.
fumble through a little bit. But he'll like read the standard 4th grade level reading that it comes in a newspaper for the,
Yeah.
at an 80% proficiency, I'd say. And I was just like, it's like, you're already, this school is already failing him.
Yeah.
They
It's
saw that
crazy.
he messed up a few letters in his computer based assessment, and they think he's an emergent reader. And he'll sit there and read the subtitles on a movie. Every
Yeah.
once in a while we have those playing. That way it's, it's always loud in our house with the 4 kids. And he'll sit there and just read all the words as they come. And you're just like, dang, but
Yeah.
she doesn't even know that. She's telling us he's on the verge of reading. So, and then that will lead straight into the shit show that is post secondary education, or bachelor's level college and even above. I think the first thing that I'd personally want to talk about is one of the reasons it's not worth it is the excessive cost and the student debt that the majority of students incur, depending on their demographics, their parents' demographics, and whether they are already skilled in receiving some kind of scholarships. But the cost, the inflationary cost of college, is absolutely absurd when the value hasn't changed. In fact, it's gone down.
Yeah, the value is negative now. I would argue. I think I said last episode or two ago that the goal of college is to make you a gay communist, and they're very successful at that. There's there's no reason for this. If the only reason that they can still cite is more average income, that's already again not true due to AI. AI has decimated the both what students have to do, and I'll read a few, some snippets from a few articles here about how the landscape is changing so drastically that students cannot and will not read, they cannot and will not write, and there's no way to force them to because ChatGPT is so efficient and so good now that it's indistinguishable. And so professors spend their time trying to figure out what was done with AI, and they realize it was all done with AI. And what do you do? And so they're going to keep going for these funds, but the we have to remember, if you think that we're taking extremes here, you got to just remember that the law that was passed that made it so that you could not default on one single type of debt, which is student loan debts, to the federal government, was penned by Joe Biden as a senator. Of course, he was the name on the bill, but the U.S. Congress passed that bill and said our biggest asset is student loan debt. And if we allow students to treat it like any other debt that they have, where you can go through proper proceedings and declare bankruptcy, and it's not an easy thing. It's not like a good thing to go through, but there is a prescription in the law for everyone from someone who has credit card debt up to Donald Trump can default and go and declare bankruptcy on debt. There's a process for it. You pay the penalty, you pay a steep price for it, right? But it is an option to you in the law, except for one thing, which is when you put yourself in debt as an 18-year-old to the federal government and boost their asset sheet with their largest single item on the balance sheet, you cannot default to them. That's so you hear them talking about student loan forgiveness. That was always a thing that Biden talked about and Harris talked about. It's like, you guys did it. You know how you could forgive student loans is at least at a minimum reverse with the stroke of a pen the law that enslaves these children so that you can declare bankruptcy on everything but this debt, which is why so many students can never get away from this. And so they paused it during COVID for like 4 years of continuously renewing the pause and the no interest rate increase. Well, you now turn back on the floodgates, and so defaults are going through the roof. But it's not like with any other debt where you can absolve yourself by taking the hits and the punishment and going through the process like that. You
And,
can only get more underwater. it's
and
it's
one of the
it's
reasons
criminal.
those, and one of the tied in things that we just recently talked about on an episode, that the reasons those defaults are through the roof is Parkinson's law. So if you tell somebody we're going to shut off this payment and they believe that that
Mm-hmm.
might happen forever because they're going to be forgiven, they then started spending every dollar they had and never made
Oh yeah,
provision for these future payments. So now all of a sudden the payments are due and they're like, I don't have enough money. I can't pay this,
yeah.
because they've inflated their lifestyle over those four or 5 years. So it all ties back together to the same exact principles we always talk about. But college tuition, the inflation since 1980, the general CPI index for overall inflation in the United States is 228%, which is absurd in itself. And we've beat that one. We've talked about that a lot. But what do you think the college inflation index would be? If you just had to
Over
guess off the top of your mind, what do you think it is?
1,000%.
That's really close. Since 1980, the average cost of tuition has increased 1,184%. And the value of that education in my mind has gone down. And I always think about, I remember my dad telling me when the steel mills were robust here, he graduated high school in 66. And he talked about guys that like he worked in the steel mill with who would come home in the summer, because that you could just pick up a job at the mills anytime. And they would work the 4 months of their college summer and completely pay for the next year's tuition.
Mm-hmm.
Cash, done. They worked 3.5 to 4 months, paid for college, came out of school debt free. It's virtually impossible to do that now as a wage earner like they used to. Yeah, and then now that the average federal student loan debt per borrower right now, 30 oh, almost $40,000. It's like 39,000, I think 735. What I read this morning. It's like $1.7 trillion or something like that in total student loan debt across the country. Absolutely insane. Like I don't want to be a part of that statistic.
The first, I would, speaking in broad generalities here, I would say that our generation, millennials, is the first generation with major student loan debt. And the generations prior to us, I mean, possibly Gen X, but
Oh yeah.
like this concept worked well for the boomer generation. Like our dads instilled in us the value of a college education, not from some misunderstanding, or like short-sightedness. That was the system that worked. Those stats about the value of getting an education were true. It made sense. And so that is going to fade away, and it's already starting to fade away. And I think now that our generation as millennials are like the generation of parents of children coming up on that age, again, very loosely speaking here, plus or minus 10 years of, you know, we now have seen our peers with this enormous burden that they can't do anything about, or it is not that they can't, like they can pay down the loans, of course, but it's it's not something that is easy to get out from under, and it's impossible to get out from under by the means of any other type of debt that you might incur. And so I think that idea of coming home to the steel mill and working and paying off your tuition, when that was the case, it made sense, even by our generation. I mean, I don't think it made too much sense. Like for me, I went to Georgia Tech for undergrad, and the Navy paid for 8 of my 9 semesters because no one graduates there in 4 years. So I did 4.5 years, and I paid for the first semester of my 5th year with the career starter loan from USAA. So I was lucky that I didn't take on any debt. And what my parents would say for me, they were able to put towards housing. So like I'm a situation where it worked out really well. I did make, I did have better income prospects by doing that, since I went right into a guaranteed, pretty well paying job with the Navy, and I didn't have any debt coming out of it. So I'm on the example in the bell curve where like it really, really was valuable for me.
And
But
if you wanted to be a naval officer, you're in one of those small sections of people that need a degree. You
yeah.
know, they're like if depending on what you want to do with your life, if you're absolutely passionate to do a certain thing, you have to have a degree. And then for those people, it makes sense. But for the majority of people, that's actually not the case. You know, if you
Hmm.
want to be a nurse, you're going to need at least an associate's degree. If you want to be, you mentioned doctors and lawyers. Yeah, you're going to need a degree. If you want to be an officer in the United States military, you're going to need a degree. It might make sense in those cases,
Yeah.
which I think leads me to like the next thing is one of the
Well,
reasons it's a
one more point. The final
yeah,
the final point on that last semester that I actually paid for out of pocket using a career starter loan, I paid $9,000 for. And so
yeah,
that was 2010, and so that was
it's crazy.
15 years ago. And so imagine what one semester Georgia Tech costs right now. Probably double that, and that's
I bet
in
it is.
15 years. But but if you look at the cost now, it seems impossible to justify, especially in fields like lawyers, for instance. Everything I've read on AI are one of the fields that's being most replaced, because there's no reason to have someone sit there and sift through case law and all of these, the many hours you spend in the law library, when when AI can just do all of that for you instantly. And so the need for these junior associates, and that's where I've read at law firms, it's like they're just not hiring because they don't need those new people. And so how long until, it's kind of a long like Python. But right now, if people look at going into the medical field, and I have 15 years of education ahead of me, $1.5 million in debt, and then my prospects of making a job now, like what is AI going to do to that? Even if we don't have the statistic that the AI is 400% more accurate in diagnosing, looking at a set of inputs than a human doctor is. Even without that, who knows? At the pace everything's moving, who knows in 2 years what it'll look like how heavily the medical industry will rely on AI. There'll always be doctors, I'm sure, but because there's a giant question mark of, by the time I get to this thing in 10, 12 years of residency and all, and graduate school and all that, by the time I get there, why would I enter this and incur this enormous debt burden when I don't know how much, if they're even going to be hiring? And so we're going to have this Python squeeze on those kind of jobs, especially. And those were the ones that were the outlier on the bell curve. And so you're going to have an even less of a value proposition in 10 years when a lot of those doctors and lawyers drop off.
I just actually saw a little thing. I think it was on Twitter. It was a doctor showing like he's like I spent 30 years perfecting being able to look at this scan, and he's going through the scan of somebody's lungs, and he's like, right here it says something, and he went through a few things, and they've got pneumonia, and I'd automatically started treatment on pneumonia, and then he backed out, and he's like, my job is becoming completely irrelevant because he put the scan in an AI system, and it showed all of the diagnosis that he spent his whole life making, learning how to make quickly by reading that chart, or not the chart, but
Yeah.
the scan. And yeah, it's absolutely true. So it's what's that going to look like in 15 years if somebody's starting their bachelor program now and has that much runway in front of them to start the job? Boy, that actually leads perfectly into the next thing. Is I was thinking of being a poor return on investment is that like a lot of these degrees don't even justify the cost, and people aren't even working in their field. Up to 50% of people never take a job in the line of work that they studied in college, especially for undergrad.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not even close. I mean, we made the point before on the podcast. You walk into a coffee shop. Most people that work in there are going to have college degrees and not
Mm-hmm.
using them. And we've just we've been sold a product that has since become rotten, and but you and I both kind of escaped it unscathed, or we were made better for it. But that the instances of that are going to be fewer and fewer. A couple of someone who's really documented the decline of college well has been Vox Day, and I have a few different posts that succinctly like should make the case that there's not a reason to send your child to college, and I'm going to kind of pepper a few of them in here. One of
Yeah.
them said that Trump shouldn't just stop with banning the Department of Education. The entire public school system needs to go. A new report has found that Illinois has 60 public schools at which 0 students reported grade level of proficiency in either reading or math. Across the Prairie State, there are 23 schools, including 18 in Chicago, where no student demonstrated proficiency in either subject in 2022. Not a single student, according to an analysis of state data by WirePoints. Another 7 Illinois schools had 0 proficiency in reading alone, and 30 had no students with proficiency in math alone, the studies found. Even calling these institutions schools is a misnomer. They're uneducation factories. The children would be better off if they were allowed to just play all day, unsupervised in the nearest park or field. Maybe not in Chicago, but in general, more of them would learn how to read too. And that's what we're doing with our daughter is like she's just playing. That's all she needs to do. She needs to be curious and she needs to play and she needs to ask questions and be around and converse with adults. And that's where we've noticed, and I think it's going to continue. She's always been very bright and ahead of her age and has gotten like compliments along those lines from so many people. Even yesterday, I was at the park with my 2 daughters and there was a nanny there and she said, your daughters don't have any screens, do they? And I said, no, we once or twice a week we'll watch a movie, but they don't have any devices or screens. And she's like, yeah, I've nannied a lot of kids, and the only other ones I've seen that are as attentive and polite and like thoughtful at that age were the ones that didn't have screens. And I think we're going to really start to see a difference because as her friends all go to school and she's staying home, her friends are going to be interacting with other 4-year-olds, which is good socially. But as far as your development, your language, my daughter does, we're trying to do as many homeschool activities so we can get that. But her majority of her time is going to be spent with adults. So she's just going to be like buoyed up to the level of conversation and to the things that we're trying to talk to her about. So I mean, I can't even imagine she's going to be just a force in 10 years. It's really cool to see. But the idea that, I mean, you saw, I don't know how much of this you saw in public education when you were a teacher, but just the students aren't learning anything valuable. They're literally being retarded in their education and their development. Like the education system retards their educational development. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally makes sense, and I think it's absolutely true, and especially if you think about right now. You were talking about AI and how fast that's accelerating. And I can promise you that virtually no students in the public school system are learning anything about AI. There might be a handful of courses and at the high school level where they're like introducing chat GPT to them or something like that. Definitely not Grok because now he's an enemy. But so maybe chat GPT, but it's like that doesn't even touch the future of AI and what it can do. It's like the entry level, anybody can log on the computer and ask a question. It's the new Google, but it doesn't encapsulate like the changes in the world that AI is bringing. And I guarantee you, they leave the public school system knowing nothing about AI that they learned in the public school system. And that is going to be the most important thing to be able to work with and around.
Yeah. Yeah. I got another post here, and I, in a newsletter a couple months ago, I did an article that was along these lines, and so you can find links to these. But I want to read. This is about the progression from the public education system into college. It's from a university professor lamenting the precipitous decline he has observed in the ability of his students. He says, "I work as a professor for a university on the East Coast. What strikes me most is the decline in student writing and comprehension skills that is among the worst I've ever encountered. These are sharp declines. I recently assigned a reading exam, and I had numerous students inquire if it's open book, and I had to tell them that no, it isn't. My students don't read. They expect to be able to submit assignments more than once. They were shocked at essay grades and asked if they could resubmit for higher grades. I told them no. They were very surprised. To all K through 12 teachers who have gone through unfair admin demanding for higher grades, who have suffered parents screaming and yelling at them because their student didn't perform well on an exam, I'm sorry. I work at the university level so that I wouldn't have to deal with parents, and I don't. If students fail, and they do, I simply don't care at all. I don't feel a pang of disappointment when they perform at a lower level, and I keep the standard high because I expect them to rise to the occasion. What's mind boggling is that the students don't even try. At this, I also don't care. I don't get paid that great, but it still saddens me. Students used to be determined, and the standard of learning used to be much higher. I'm sorry if you were punished for keeping your standards high. None of this is fair, and the students are suffering tremendously for it." And then Vox's commentary on that, he says, and this gets more into like, what do we do about it? He said, if there were any chance of salvaging the USA as a means of organizing Heritage America, this might be lamented, but there isn't. So this is a very positive thing for those who are propagating Heritage America, as the intellectual capabilities of the ruling elite and the invaders who prop them up are in steep decline. Political collapse and balkanization is inevitable, so it is paramount for heritage Americans to ensure that their descendants are A, numerous, and B, well educated. This is the way that America will survive and eventually thrive again, stronger and wiser than before. I think that's spot on, because we talk about you need to be having children, and you need to be educating them, and you need to leave them wealth, because you have to keep them ahead of the curve, because society is going to continue in the same way that if you go to public school, you're going to be sucked down to the median there financially as well. Like if you don't prepare them and you don't set them up for success, they're going to be sucked down to the level and keep learning the same lessons. But those lessons are going to get harder and harder to learn, because you can no longer outpace inflation with the conventional financial planning model, which is not something you even exposed to. So like you have to be the education for not just for financial education, but you have to be their history teacher. You have to be their English teacher. You have to be their math teacher. And it's like it doesn't matter if you don't think you're strong in those subjects. You can teach them, and you could do it better than their teachers can, because their teachers can't give you the standards are going to continue to decline. And this is a self-perpetuating death spiral of the system, starting at the lower levels and really coming to a crescendo in the university system, which is now totally pointless and defunct.
Yeah, and I think most people have the absolute capability of being able to teach anything that their children need at the level they're at. Like most people have this fear because maybe they struggled with that type of coursework when they were in their own public education system. But if you want to learn anything being taught all the way through the high school level as an average IQ adult in America, you can learn it. You can learn it well enough to teach it and work it through. And as a matter of fact, that's probably a better method, is to learn it alongside your kids, because it will actually force them to self-teach some of that information, which will actually make them better at it than just
Yeah.
being spoon-fed. So yeah, you can learn anything to teach your children anything that they need to know, and they can teach themselves, which it's, there's a curriculum out there, the Ron Paul curriculum. One thing I really like about it is it's mostly self-taught. It just kind of guides you through practical uses of the information you would get in a high school, middle school curriculum, and they're to be self-taught even without parental involvement. So like it's absolutely possible. But that what you said there, I think started to touch on one of the most important reasons that I don't want to send my kids to anything. But if they do go to college, there's like a handful of particular schools I would consider. Grove City College, which is like an hour north of where I live. Are you familiar with Grove City?
No.
Phenomenal Christian school. They take zero federal money. They did not shut down during COVID. They were all over the news for it. Like this little school of like 3,000 kids was all over the news because they refused to shut down. They forced them to go to church services weekly. Jeff Herberner, who's one of they actually have an Austrian economics. There's 3 Austrian
Oh,
economics in the
awesome.
department. The lead is one of like the smartest Austrians in the country. His name's Jeff Herberner. If I was interested to the degree of economics at 18 as I am now, I would have gone there. Now knowing
Yeah.
that he's there, it's like what a missed opportunity right up the road. But the political and ideological indoctrination of the standard school across there's probably we could probably there's probably 20 or fewer colleges that I know of in this country that aren't going to just inundate your children with a failed ideology and
Yeah.
left-wing politics.
Yeah. It's
And you experienced that firsthand with your graduate degree, which I think are some of the best stories you tell.
oh yeah, that honestly we should do another. I talked about my experience at Harvard in my bio episode, which was early on in the podcast. It would probably be worth talking about the Victim Olympics again on a full episode, just because there's so much to unpack there. But yeah, and I don't like say this from a position of watching from afar. I mean, I have a good undergraduate degree and I have a master's from Harvard, and I can say that of the things that I've learned, the master's from Harvard was the least valuable. I mean, it has value as far as networking, kind of. Not that I'm doing anything in that field, but if I were, there's power there. But what you need to know to get through that that program is very little. Like you just need to be compliant. And I think that I think that the final nail that is going to be the fact that no students are reading, no students are expected to do assignments, and if they are, they're doing it via AI. And there's so many instances and a lot of posts by Vox Day about how like professors attesting to this, talking about how the students are basically functionally illiterate because there's no need for them in their lives up to that point to sit down and craft an essay without distraction. Everything is just doing it on your phone while looking at other things. They cannot function without laptops in class. There's so many instances of this that it really is in my mind a net negative. If some now, I mean, if we're hiring someone, we want to hire someone for Remnant. If someone spent 4 years in college and made that decision, I would now view that as like, well, why? It's not like in a flip of what it used to be like, well, what's this, why didn't you get a degree? Or in a lot of cases, writing off applicants without degrees. It's like now I'd be like, well, that seems like a questionable decision. Why did you go to college for 4 years instead of earning and producing and providing value? Like, are we going to have a problem with you as far as expectations? Are you literate? I would tend to like to using all the data is showing about the worthlessness of the college education system, and start with that. Like, okay, you have something to prove now because you went to college. You have a higher bar. I'm a lot more skeptical of you because I know what you've been through. Whether you went to a community college or Harvard, I know what you've been through, and I don't trust it. And so I'm a lot more skeptical. You have a lot more to prove to me, not because you're a step above, but because you made a questionable decision, which could be remedied. But it's not an automatic like it's the inverse of the typical mindset around having that degree.
Yeah, and I think even like with all the stuff that's been everywhere, especially in the social media since Charlie Kirk's murder, like all of his videos are constantly in the forefront of everything you look at, and he talks about that. Like when he was hiring for Turning Point USA, it was like that was a net negative if people were college educated in a lot of ways. Like he did not put that as a requirement for any of the jobs,
Yeah.
nor was it something that was going to put you to the top of the list. And it had to be vetted now.
Yeah, neither does Google. Like they don't like this tech companies don't ask for college degrees anymore, or a
Yeah,
lot of
no.
them. And I saw one that a, a student that was trying to debate him was and instantly trying to call into question his credibility because it's like, well, you went to community college, right? And he's like, yeah, I went to community college. And the guy's like, well, so you're going to tell us about the value of a college education, but you went to community college. He's like, yeah, I built $100 million business at 18, and now I'm running the largest pack and the largest conservative education company in history. And I started that in my teens. What are you studying? And he was like, I can't remember what he said, but I'm sure it was something like gender studies. It was like, okay, so I it's a test. Like, you're making my point here by saying that I am in the situation that I'm in with a community college degree. It's like there's not these dividing factors anymore of educated versus uneducated. Calling it the education system was a clever ploy, and not, I think when it started, it wasn't the intention. I think that there was still possibly some value there, but now it's certainly a misnomer, as that article said, and it's very misleading, and it should definitely be changed, because it implies something, and it makes you think that the default is that you're educating people, educating students, and then we have to argue the case that you're not. And in reality, it's clear that you're not. You should make the case for remaining the Department of Education. So I would love to see that entire department abolished. We did get a good note on the homeschool front here in California. The bill that was seeming like a certain passage, which is going to essentially throttle and choke off the homeschool charter system that we use. They had a counter bill with the idea that we want to keep homeschool preserved, but we want to eliminate the fraud that they said was rampant in the system. All they're doing is, teachers lobbies are realizing students aren't going, like, people are pulling their students out of school. They get funded based on participation. It's a participation trophy in funding education. It's not about results. It's just about numbers. And so the education lobby, which also should be firebombed, was pushing to get this bill removed and say, hey, we need to bring these students back into the system, not because they're not getting educated, which of course they said that, but because they just want the money. And so the idea of lobbying and the idea that there's an education lobby is preposterous. And I think that results should speak for themselves, and that would be gone tomorrow. But
The more people that don't do it, that don't participate in public education, the more the more data there is to show how much of a failure public education is. So it's just like the vaccine industry. You can't have, coming from the perspective of the pharmaceuticals and the doctors, you can't have this large number of people that get no vaccines and on every metric are healthier, because when
right.
you get that large data set and you study them, it will show that it's superior. So they have to be pulled back into the fold,
Mm-hmm.
made less healthy. That way the system can continue, and the billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars can continue to be spent on their careers, on their research, and in their industries. It's exactly the same with public education. I'd put 100 100 students who were homeschooled of standard intelligence up against 100 students of, median IQ of the public school system every single day of the week. I don't even want the outliers. I want the kids who score average on an IQ test, and then give them the exact same test of ability, the exact same literacy and mathematics test. And I guarantee you the homeschoolers come out on top.
Yeah, there's not even a question
Yeah.
anymore. And just like the way the overreach of the medical industry created they created a control group of anti-vax children now, age 0 to 5,
Mhm.
that they now have that data. Of course, again, they never will, but if they wanted to, they could actually do science and do a double-blind safety test and realize that the incidence of disease and illness
Is
in the
drastically
vaccinated,
lower.
yeah, and the unvaccinated is basically, very, very low
Yeah.
relative to the vaccinated. And the same thing, you're overreach in 2020. So many people are homeschooling now, and in the same wave, a lot of this is overlap. The same students that aren't vaccinated are homeschooled because they're not, and therefore are getting better educations. And so now you have a control group, and it's just, it's a great thing to see that people are realizing more and more it's okay to question these things. It's okay to look into it. It's okay to do your due diligence and not trust these experts, because if you keep trusting experts when they get proven lying to you over and over, you kind of deserve what you get. And so
I almost never
if
trust the experts anymore on anything.
no, no, I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, so just because we're under a little bit of a time constraint
yeah,
today, and we could probably go on for another hour, but let's kind of transition into what's better. So we're all
mhm,
we're doing is identifying a problem, but what's a solution, and what are some of the alternatives? And I will start with saying the initial part of this is what we teach on building capital and having capital control. So we're obviously big advocates of starting children's policies. And even if you don't, policies on yourself, where we are paying significant income compared to, I'm sorry, significant premium compared to income. And a portion of that premium, when our policies are built for IBC, is in PUAs, which is going to help expand that capital base at a much rapid pace. And that gives us a launching point into some other opportunities. And even without that, there are a lot of other opportunities that are better. I just think that that's going to accelerate the launch by having access to capital. What's your first thing you would think of as an alternative and a better thing to do than ship your kids off to college at 18 to be indoctrinated?
I believe it's clear that there's no value in going to college on almost any situation. However, if you were to do that, there's certainly no reason that you have to do 18 through 22. You could do 20 through 24. We know that people don't start families, they don't start their lives statistically. If you go to college, you start your life so much later than if you don't go to college. So like just by going to college, you inherently and not inherently, but statistically you start families later, even though you're notionally more secure and more stable and a better income, et cetera. The average age of starting a family when you go to college versus when you don't go to college, it's much later when you go to college. And if that's the case, we can safely say that if we're assuming you're going to start your family later anyways, there's no reason to not take a 2-year gap period and start a business. Even just traveling and not incurring student debt is a better use. But I would say at that point you should be hustling and starting a business and learning about how to pay taxes. Like go into college with an idea of what the world is like, the business world and the entrepreneurial world, and even working 2 years like at a restaurant, but doing something to earn income as an adult, where you are now figuring out taxes, you are figuring out how to live on your own. Go into college with that instead of rolling from high school where you're shelter, you're at home, and rolling right into a situation where everything is paid for you, of course in a lot of cases by student loans, unfortunately. But if that's the case, you're not getting that experience of how to pay taxes, you're not understanding how to generate enough income to pay bills, et cetera. So I'd say take 2 years, and even if you do nothing but not incur student loan debt, you're doing better. But ideally, work and earn income, start a business, and provide some value, and try another. If the trajectories of your life could go two different ways, and you realize maybe try an apprenticeship as an electrician for 2 years just to see and realize this trajectory is going to be way more profitable than going the education route. I would say the 2-year gap route, even if you want to go to college, is a great break on going down a potentially very suboptimal path.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I've said for years, even when I was a public school teacher, is one of the I mean, I used to tell the kids this who were intelligent, and I knew none of them would do it. But I said, your high school diploma is so worthless that if I were you at 16 years old, I would study for it, because it's actually probably more difficult than getting a diploma. I would study for the GED. Get your GED as soon as you're eligible, if your parents will sign off for it. Get out of high school at 16 years old. Start community college. Get 2 years of education, and then transfer those 2 years at pennies on the dollar in comparison into a 4-year degree, and graduate when you're 20 years old. And now you're
Yeah.
20 years old and starting to work, or get out and start that apprenticeship, and then start moonlighting if you're ambitious enough. Like go start an apprenticeship at 16 years old as a plumber, as an electrician, whatever it is you're interested in, and start moonlighting the evenings working on a business degree at community college, just to start building up some credits and build yourself options. You're going to be 2 years ahead of all of your peers, making money, learning skills, becoming industrious. And nobody in my entire life has ever asked me for my high school diploma. It has been
No.
completely irrelevant my entire high school. All I had to do is say I graduated from Norwin High School in 1999, and they're like, "Oh, cool."
Yeah.
I don't, that's not even on like a job application typically, but like nobody cares if you have a high school diploma. You could, you could separate from that, get your GED and start college. You could do so many things, but anyway, the whole point of that was like, start that apprenticeship and moonlight if you want, working on some online classes, start working on a business degree, something you think you might be interested in, and just test it out without having to get indoctrinated and going in debt for it while you're learning a valuable skill. There's another awesome program out there called Praxis. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So I'll just read the little blurb here. I've listened to a couple podcasts years ago with the guy who created it. It's a year-long intensive apprenticeship designed for ambitious young adults to gain practical skills and experience in a growing business, combining a 6-month online boot camp with a 6-month paid apprenticeship to help participants build a career without traditional 4-year college degree. The program focuses on in-demand roles like marketing, operations, sales, and customer success, providing one-on-one coaching, a project-based curriculum, and a portfolio to help graduates secure permanent employment. And the ones who are good typically are hired by the place they apprenticeship with at 18 years old. They start that right out of high school, and at 19 they're making typically above, median salaries and for compared to the college graduates coming out. Fantastic way. They literally just jump right into true skills with a mentor teaching them how to operate within a business, not the theory and the bullshit that their professor doesn't know anything about. There's so many options out there. Start a business. I think you're better off cutting grass and starting a lawn care company at 18 than you are going to
Absolutely.
university. Like, most people aren't going to stay in that. You're going to realize that there's way better ways to make money, but you're going to get out there and be industrious. You're going to learn how to sell. You're going to learn how to talk to people. You're going to learn how to manage a small company, like, and how to deal with all the problems that come with that, buying equipment, inventory, all the things you need there. Like, you'll get a better education in 1 year of owning a small landscaping business than you will freshman year of college. I know I
Yeah.
did because I had that.
I think that you brought up a good point about the high school diploma. I mean, just spend some time thinking through what is a high school diploma? Why do we just jump to that is a requirement? Why do you need to wait till 18 to demonstrate a low bar of knowledge to check the box and go to the next stage? Like, why not treat a 16-year-old like an adult as far as your interaction with your children and your expectations of them? Why not treat them as if they've already graduated high school? Because by 16, they're very likely, if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking this way, I would imagine that they're past that point, way past a average high school senior, leaving high school education. So where did the idea of a graduating high school and getting a high school diploma having any value at 18? Like, that is just part of the system, and that's part of, I'm not even going to say marketing. It's just it's so entrenched. It's an entrenched
It
process
is.
that I think went from originally, I'll assume good intentions back in the education system in the beginning, but it's so entrenched now that why can't we rethink that? This is the kind of conversation that is, and it's going to be distressing for a lot of people because it's not even out of the box anymore. Like, the Overton window now encompasses talking about the lack of value in college education. So it's not like that's a stretch, but we can all say that and understand it. But then, I'm far away from that point still, but it's like, wait, okay. So my daughter actually not going to go to college because I still have that, even as I say all this, and I can make a very compelling case for the absolute lack of value here. It's still like, wait a second, am I going to, shoot, am I doing the right thing by her not going to college? Again, not a decision point I'm at for 14 more years if we keep the conventional schedule, but it still is like, oh man, I don't actually implementing this. Maybe she should just go just to be safe. It's like that twinge is still there. So I think this could be a very conflicting conversation. But like, if you're worried about it, I'd say it's kind of like us discussing in 2000, the best strategy to invest in Blockbuster Video. It's like we're here debating how we can optimize our shares and our investment in Blockbuster. It's pretty clear to see in the future, like, this is going away. I kind of picture like the South Park episode where Randy Marsh is super excited because he's buying the last Blockbuster in town, so he's got a monopoly on the video rental. Like, right as that entire model collapses. I don't think by the time that a lot of our listeners with young children are going to be faced with this decision that they'll even be a decision to make. Personally, I think it'll be a joke by that point.
It should be. I think it'll become pretty clear. But I'm not discounting college for my kids. It's going to depend on what they want. Like, I look at the two. My daughter has wanted to be a nurse since she was like in third or fourth grade. She's in ninth and she still wants to be a nurse. If she's in 12th and she wants to be a nurse, I mean, I'm going to try to convince her to go to community college and get an associate's in nursing and then later go get a bachelor's and not get indoctrinated into the college system. But if that's what she wants to do, she's going to need that. And I'm not going to tell her not to do that, not to follow what she really wants to do. My son, he has zero clue what he wants to do, and I will not encourage him to go to college. If he still has zero idea what he wants to do when he's 18, I'll be like,
yeah.
no, don't waste your time. I'm not paying for it. So don't ask me for money for tuition for you to go there and screw off and become, you know, indoctrinated with left wing bullshit. I'm not paying for that. So
Mhm.
I would encourage him to not go to college in that. case. I think I'm going to play it kid by kid, because there will still be things that people want to do to be a productive member of society. They're going to require education. And I don't think I should discourage that, but I certainly won't encourage college just for the sake of going to college.
That's the big key. And as aggressive as I talk about it, I'm trying to make this point so that you feel okay with questioning this and deciding it's not for your kid. But I agree, when it comes time to it, like, my criteria has been, if it's something that you can justify, I need this degree for this field that I'm passionate about, that I'm actually going to do, and I know how to pay for it, either using my IBC system. We don't have time to talk about what we were originally going to talk about, which was, if you would make this decision, how do you pay for it more efficiently than a absurd 529 plan? But here's how I'm going to pay for it without going into debt to the federal government. That is a decision that I would support if there's a plan laid out. But the worst thing you could possibly do is what you described. I don't know what I want to do, but I know I need a college degree, so I'm going to go figure it out. I'm going to do it live, and I'm
Find
going to,
myself.
yeah,
Like,
that's a hard no. I'm not going to be like
yeah.
overly, but that's a hard no. And I think that, again,
And
I don't think it'll really be much of a discussion when we get there, but,
I want to make one final little point, because we have to get going here for the next thing. You don't need to be in college to do an internship.
mm-hmm.
Period. An 18-year-old kid can walk up to a business, or some kind of industry and something they're interested in, and say, "I will work for free for the next 6 months. I want to learn about this." And any business, industry, corporation that is worth its weight will look at that and be like, "This kid he's willing to give me free labor because he wants to learn this." If they don't recognize the value in somebody that ambitious, move
Mm-hmm.
on. But you can get an internship. Like, you don't have to be getting out of school to get your mandatory internship to show experience, to ask for one. You can do that at 18. Step into something you want to do, and say, "Hey, I'll work for free. And if I'm good, will you hire me when I'm done?"
Yeah, then go. If you want to check out a company that might be interested in this, if there's an ambitious 18-year-old out there, hey, maybe message this company called Remnant Finance, and
Yeah,
kind of get a fire hose of learning infinite banking and life insurance and financial strategy. And we could certainly use an ambitious person willing to work for free for 6 months, and then potentially get signed on. So we got to bounce.
absolutely.
But if you have questions about how the strategies that we implement and we plan to use if our children opt to go to college, let's just schedule a call with us, and we'll talk through how this asset that we use can better suit that than just about anything else you can do. So, all right, with that, that's our take on college. Cheers.
See you.
Thanks for listening to Remnant Finance. If you found any value at all in this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend.
Remember, true financial freedom comes from taking control of your personal economy and breaking free from the status quo. So stop being a passenger in your family's financial future.
Boldly take back control of your wealth. Until next time,
This is Brian and Hans signing off.